Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the JFK Files. I'm your host and the author of Chicago's 63, Terrence McCauley. We're here today with Guy Cote. He is a native of Maine. He is also a screenwriter, a novelist, and a history teacher. The Girl in the Polka Dot Dress is his third novel, and he joins us today to talk about the overall JFK, RFK, conspiracy worlds, what's happened in terms of his research, and what he's been able to uncover. So, Guy, thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you, Terrence. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. So I know that you've done a lot of research into the RFK assassination. And as a result, I'm sure you did a lot of research that must have taken you into some of the JFK theories, scenarios, and things like that. I was wondering
Yep.
if you could share with us the overall aspect that you found about that time in American history, because the links between the two tragic events are fascinating.
Well, the Kennedy presidency will forever excite historians and history buffs because there were so many paradoxical situations within it. Here
Mhm.
you have uh, his brother, who's the attorney general, which is a bizarre situation in and of itself, the whole nepotism thing.
Right,
And he's a pit bull. Bobby Kennedy is a pit bull and he's a complete crusader for justice, but he's also covering up his brother's odd behaviors, like his dalliances with, his extracurricular marital issues and that sort of thing.
right.
Uh, and then you also have the situation where their father, Joe, was well-known, a well-known bootlegger, well-known uh, mafia connections, made a lot of his money during Prohibition doing that with his mafia connections. And of
Hmm.
course, he made a lot of money on the stock market. And he's quoted as saying himself that it takes a thief to run the stock market, and actually FDR, who put him in charge of the stock market, said the same thing about Joe Kennedy. So
Right,
Joe Kennedy has a lot of mafia connections.
right. And he was also instrumental in Hollywood for a while too.
That's right.
Right. He
Yeah, you
had an
talked
affair with Gloria Swanson
Gloria
from
Swanson.
Sunset Boulevard. Yep.
That's right. Absolutely. In fact, he had his own studio at one point where he was making his own films. At any rate, the you have this situation where many people believe that Joe Sr., the dad, used his connections with the mafia to swing a couple of key states for JFK in the election. Particularly, I think it was West Virginia was one of them. He also used his connections in Chicago. And we all know that the race between JFK and Nixon was one of the closest in American history. I think it was as close as 100,000 votes
Right.
at that time, which was the closest it had ever been. And so many people believe that if not for old man Joe using his connections with the mafia, that JFK wouldn't have won the White House.
Right.
Then, of course, JFK makes his brother Bobby the Attorney General. Bobby was the type of guy that really did see the world in black and white terms, and perhaps because of the well-known connection between his father and mafia figures, he went after the mafia as Attorney General with way more vehemence than any previous Attorney General ever had. In
Right.
fact, he basically bullied J. Edgar Hoover into doing it. J. Edgar Hoover didn't want to touch the mafia. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover was known for saying, the mafia is a myth. There is
Right.
no mob, and it took Bobby pressuring him to actually make the Justice Department and the FBI take an active role in going after the mob. And when they did, holy Toledo! I mean, they opened up a can of worms.
Yep.
He was going after the big boys, the real big boys. Carlos Marcello and Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante and those people. And so he made a lot of enemies, and they were, of course, bad for business. His activities were bad for their business. But then
Right.
you also have, the interesting situation of, at the same time, the Kennedy administration is developing a covert plan to assassinate Castro.
Right.
And they're using, they're having to use mafia contacts because, of course, before Castro took over Cuba, the mob ruled Cuba.
Right.
And so they still had their fingers in Cuba. And so the CIA, who was now in charge of developing this plan to kill Castro, they needed the mob to help them do it. They had needed their boots on the ground. So now you've got this paradoxical situation where Bobby is prosecuting and persecuting heavy, powerful mobsters. In some cases, he's kicking them out of the country.
Right,
And
with Carlos Marcello, he did that.
Marcello.
Yeah, he dumped him up in Guatemala.
That's right, exactly. And so at the same time, they're having to use them to bump off cash. And then on top of it, they abolished the plan. They changed the plan.
Right.
And that, they leave all these people who have been plotting to kill Castro, flapping in the wind.
Right, and it's especially important to point out that the Bay of Pigs happened early in the Kennedy administration, and that had been an Eisenhower plan that Kennedy didn't really believe in. And part of the reason historians and military experts say that invasion failed was because the U.S. held back on their air support. And and it left the people who were on the beach exposed. And that was something that during the entire Kennedy administration was a black eye to them. And especially after then the Cuban Missile Crisis that followed, they needed a win because they weren't sure of Kennedy's support at that time. So they were a lot of those camps that were opened and people knew about them from the first Bay of Pigs invasion were opened again for the covert second operation of the invasion that Bobby was running because they didn't trust the CIA.
That's correct. Yeah, and that's another. Yeah, I mean, JFK, as you just said, JFK felt like the CIA pressured him into agreeing for the Bay of Pigs, but JFK said repeatedly, "I am not going to give air support. I am not going to give ground support. I'm not going to commit the United States into a ground invasion of Cuba." And so, like you said, he withheld that and left them on the beaches. That was a tremendous amount of resentment built up by these people. Felt like Kennedy had abandoned them, and now you've got Bobby who's in charge. I mean, basically, JFK did not trust much of the government that he inherited, and so he put his brother in charge. He could trust his brother most of all. So he put his brother in charge of anything that he was, leery of. And of course, we all know that JFK been on record of claiming that he's going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the wind. And he was because he didn't trust the CIA, and he fired Allen Dulles, who was in charge of the CIA, which. Interestingly enough, then Allen Dulles is put in charge of the Warren Commission research. It's like there's a lot of stuff there.
I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? So much of it.
Yeah.